That whether it's a piece of history or a fragment of a story or a photograph or a place, if there's something that's calling to you, there's something that's inside you that is resonating with that. And that you have a story, you just don't know what it is yet.
It's kind of like this impressionistic process of just steeping yourself in the factual, contemporaneous material as much as possible.
It's almost like catching a rhythm or a sound or something that drives me back into the pulse of what it is that I'm creating.
On some level, I see poetry very much as an incantation or a spell. If it didn't work out loud, then it wasn't working. If it only worked really in one dimension, then it probably wasn't actually working.
I actually think of the blank page as like a weapon.
From times when I'll say or do the completely wrong thing and be totally horrified, there are times when I'm just like, thank God I'm a writer, because I'm just going to use that and put that in a story, because I can't be the only person that thought that.
But I feel like there's always more that you could be doing, or there's always this like, what if, I don't know, what if you kept driving past your job and you didn't go to work and you just kept driving and driving and driving?
Getting very particular and very intense with grammar turns out to just be something that is healthy for my body.
I have to bring like 4 different books that each would be perfect for like a different context. Like this will be perfect for the plane, and this I'm going to read on the subway, and this I'm going to read before bed. And has to be really particular. And I could also be that precise around my writing, but I think like luckily something's kicked in to make me just be able to do whatever.
Just to disappear, really. No ideas of becoming a novelist. I just wrote stories to live a life that wasn't mine.
And I mentioned before about just kind of letting things come to me, which sounds very, I don't know what, ridiculous. But I think I've realized that I don't necessarily believe in inspiration as a thing that can be counted on or that happens.
I always have a pocket notebook and a pen with me wherever I am. And I'm constantly, randomly jotting things down, things of all natures, you know. And I'll often have an idea for the novel I'm working on juxtaposed with a small list of practical errands I need to do. And I think there's something healthy about that, like having those things, you know, existing side by side. Somehow it enriches the work. It enriches the whole process and the way you inhabit the process as a human being and as an artist, you know.
For me, writing comes from an impulse or something that calls me out or something that's happening.
It's like inspiration is kind of the easiest part of the whole thing, as long as you're paying attention and hopefully not like expecting to always find that inspiration in the same place, but just being like, what am I experiencing? What am I drawn to? What's happening to me while I go through this?
You know, I think I'm a reader first, and that's why I was interested in writing. And so to have another writer, to sort of start my writing with the relationship with another writer, there's a comfort to that. There's a way in which that relationship supports me.
I'm a realist, and I love realism. And so my inspiration has always come from watching people around me. I love people, and I don't mean that in a like job interview, like I'm a people person kind of way, because I'm not really a people person at all, but I love people, and I love how messed up they are and the crazy dumb mistakes they make and the choices that go completely wrong. And I'm so fascinated by that. I love how flawed we all are. I just think it's amazing.
For me, it's like, I think a lot of my inspiration draws on like darker human emotions. I mean, there's a lot of I think the strongest emotions are kind of like the darker ones. I mean, love's pretty dark in itself. I mean, it can be. I mean, I love like, you know, the thriller psychological movies kind of stuff, and thinking about, I don't know, just like loss or obsession and infatuation. I feel like those are pretty strong emotions that a lot of people have felt. So writing, for me, when you're like thinking about, okay, I'm gonna write a love song, even if it's a nice, pretty, like, oh, blah, 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 I like thinking about it in like the darker sense of it, of like somebody that's like obsessed and would die without this person. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. Like if you listen to the song, there's gonna be somebody that's like, that speaks to me because I felt like that. Like, wow, I thought I was the only one, or, you know. And I feel like growing up, I mean, everybody's had crushes and stuff, and those things, at least in my life, were probably like the strongest emotions. So that's why I like thinking of most of my songs are like based about that, like hurting for someone. So, and sometimes you could be like hurting for even for the person that you're with. I mean, even if you have a great relationship, that's still like a really powerful bond. And so there's a lot of writing that can come off of that. So it's my main, you know, not to say that it's exclusive and I'll only write about that, but that's where I draw the most like feeling towards. So, and also the thoughts of being alone, which could be same thing based on love, I guess, because if you don't have it, then that's pretty powerful. And so a lot of people, I think, relate to songs of loneliness because at one point or another, you're going to be there.
I mean, for a story, an idea can come in the form of a person I know, or a handful of people that share some kind of trait, or a situation that seems like properly simple but also complicated. And I find, yeah, stories can take a really long time to kind of baste. Novels, I find, kind of can come in the form of sort of larger themes, or like something that I want to think about for a long period of time. They can start more abstractly, I think.
I think like an initial idea can come at any time. And often for me, like the initial seeds of projects come from an image, either one that I've seen in the world or one that just sort of comes into my mind, or something that I get from a film or something else I've read, or something I witness on the street or something like that. Like usually just like a very small germ of something. But I also I often write from a place of like having some kind of question or problem that I don't know the answer to. And I write into it, not to sort of solve it, but just to understand the question itself.
For me, place has always been very important. And I just wanted, you know, my favorite place was Reno, Nevada, where I grew up. I mean, I love it there. And so I've said a few novels there just because I like it there so much, and it was a way for me to go back there. And, you know, I've written novels set around here, or at least one around here in St. John's, because I like St. John's so much. And then Eastern Oregon and Nevada and Arizona in general, because I just think those places are beautiful, and I always want to be going there. But usually I'm just unable to, so I write about it.
But if I looked back at the way I've been operating, I'd say, okay, here's a book that I wrote that is really a reaction to a series of newspaper stories about a father and daughter who were living in the wilderness and then disappeared. And I'm just seeing what comes out of me if I find myself attracted to things and follow my curiosity and just kind of daydream on that. So, and then the next project, The Shelter Cycle, is about a church in Montana that believed the world would end in 1990. And I just kind of surrounded myself with that material. So with Spells, it was really a matter of surrounding myself with photographs and images. And again, I knew I couldn't travel, so all my travel was internal.
For each book I've been working on, while I'm working on it, I generally assemble a shelf full of of works of literature that to me are like the emblematic works that will somehow serve as guiding lights, in my own project.
I don't know exactly where some of the work emerges from exactly. Where does writing come from? But I've learned to just sort of trust the process itself, the feeling, the moment, the rhythm of the language.
As long as I'm paying attention, I feel like I'll try to grab everything I can from what it is that I'm watching or looking at or experiencing. And then I really don't worry about where it's going or what it'll be until later. I just try to notice when I'm thinking and then get that down so that later I can put it into some other form.
Pretty inspiring to just think of you can take anything and make it into a melody and then make that into a song and hope that people like it. That's pretty inspiring.
I don't know. You can get inspired by anything. You see an obese guy walking down the street might be the most inspiring thing. There might be something in that guy's face that just kills you. Or at a grocery store, or it could be any of that. Or you could hear a beautiful song, and that makes you think of something that makes you think of something else that unveils some kind of scar on yourself that you want to get rid of, so you start thinking about that. I don't know, I get inspired by everyday things more than anything, so I don't, I never really think about it, really. But it's mostly people-driven, and it's mostly working class issues and people that inspire me. That being said, I can hear one beautiful song and get inspired to write a whole novel set around one beautiful song. So I don't know.
I have to be alone. I tend to work in my basement. I tend to write by hand, and I tend to not allow any machines around me. So that's but that can change too. I think when I started out also, I had so many rules about when I could write and how I could write and how long I should be writing and how much I should accomplish at any given time. I think there are processes or there are habits or there are practices about how I gather material or how I try to proceed or how I try to allow things to come to me. But I guess one thing I'd say is that the more things that I've written, the more confident I've become that I'll figure it out eventually. So I'm less anxious up front about things getting messy. So I feel like it's not for me to say whether I become a better writer over this 25 or 30 years or whatever, but I know for a fact that I'm a lot more comfortable in chaos. So I'm a lot more comfortable when things fall apart. And part of that is I've been in a lot of situations where I've been working on a book or a story and I've lost track of what was happening. I've become confused and I've run away from it. And then a couple of years later, I've been in a similar situation and I've stayed with it and resolved it. So I've become more confident in that way.
I start longhand. It's really important to me to be using an actual pen on actual paper at the beginning of a project. That just keeps me moving at the pace that I need to be moving at, a slower pace that allows me to really sink into the imaginative scenario I'm creating.
I do give myself the chance to come into something. So I will often take long walks, for example, and try to find where it is that I'm working from and what it is that I'm doing.
If I'm not working here, I'm usually working in a cafe, and it's just the more uplifting energy there is around me, the better it is. And so I'm just here's a cold coffee and here's my headphones, and I'm just really listening to some super upbeat music.
I'll maybe read an essay or a poem or a couple of poems, and then I'll kind of go to the page from there. But I really like the blank page. I think of it as a weapon and a friend, like a friendly weapon, I guess.
I'm a big pen to paper person. So usually the way my process works is I do first drafts onto paper, usually in my journal. I transfer my second draft technically is like into the computer, and as I'm typing from my paper draft into the computer, I also am editing, so it's almost like a second draft by the time it gets into the computer. Then I print it out, and that's when I really start editing. So usually I edit like this, where I will print a story out and it looks just like this, where it's like, there's usually like marks and highlights and giant cuts and crazy scrawled notes on the back and crazy bright, like, this is what I do. So I'll be like walking around the house and I'll be like, oh, I gotta remember to put a whatever about the wave in. And so I'll write wave on a Post-it and then like put it here.
Sometimes I'll be driving around or I'll get a melody stuck in my head. And so I'll usually like pull up my recorder on my phone and just like hum it so I don't forget it. And then I'll just sit here and pull up my guitar and like, okay, try and find the chords that work with it. But a lot of the times I'll just sit down and grab my guitar and the lyrics and the melodies kind of come together. So I'll have an idea of something that I want to sing about or a style of a song that I want to kind of emulate and see what happens. And so sometimes I'll sit here for hours and just like play chords and nothing comes up. And then sometimes I'll sit down here and play 2 chords and write a whole song. And it's like, oh, okay, how'd that happen?
The sitting there hunched over the keyboard or whatever, I mean, as if it's just like that all the time. I mean, it's often kind of just more like this, or like looking out the window. But like that being at the desk is super important. But then writing also, I mean, that's the weird thing about writing is it never stops. Like the job is never done. And so it's walking to the store, riding the bus is also part of the writing. And that is like a crucial part.
It really, really varies depending on the project and also depending on what else is going on in my life. For a while, I really considered myself a first thing in the morning writer. But I had a kid a year and a half ago, and I no longer, that it's no longer my time. So I've had to become a lot more adaptable. Also my work schedule changes all the time, and I've moved a lot, so even though I am really a person of routines and have a vision of an ideal process or routine, it just sort of has to happen when it happens.
Yeah, I mean, when I write fiction, usually is when I'm really taking care of myself. I get up earlier, I'll go running. I worry about what I eat, I lay off the booze. For the most part, and then when I'm writing songs, it's usually I don't care about any of that stuff. It's usually like something goes south with me, and then I start writing songs about that to help me out. I've always written songs and stories just to help myself out. So if you see me and I look like I've slept under a car, it's usually I'm writing songs then.
I mean, one thing about process, I think, is that when you figure out what works for you, you should typically change it as soon as possible, because you start writing the same kinds of things because process can dictate that.
In the last few years with one of my newest books, I started incorporating the typewriter here into my process, and that has been a hugely advantageous thing added in there. It really allows me to see the words and the actual fall of the words on the page in a whole new way. They're formatted differently. They're in a different, they're in a different typeface, and it just kind of removes that sense from my imaginative process and my writerly mind that those words are fixed, that they're concrete. I can approach the work much more with a sense of a much more organic, quality about it, and the words become much more less precious, I guess. I'm willing to throw stuff out. I'm willing to shift things around.
Maybe that's why I like to stand too. But when I'm walking, I can sort of find the place within that repetitive process of steps. And I think natural areas tend to help because I can settle into them and make sure that I sort of can, am not just caught up in in these urban spaces, which have their own rhythms and inflections, but which are not necessarily taking me someplace else.
It usually is just sort of like I'll type up one big document of all the scattered lines, or if I can tell they go together, I'll kind of just randomly put them in there. Otherwise, it just goes into a huge, I think I have one thing open that's like 12 pages of lines, and I know that they all belong together or were born out of the same idea or will respond to one another, but right now it's just a pile of junk. And so then I just try to pull the lines together that I do think have some like friction with each other, and then try to see what I was thinking or see how these things tell their own story.
I feel like I've always identified as a writer, but when I started getting serious about having a daily writing practice, things started to move for me in different ways. And I think of my daily writing practice as writing or reading. So I try to make sure that I'm reading or writing for an hour every day. That's sort of above and beyond any work-related stuff that I might be doing or general communications.
Because I first started writing in the workshop environment, I feel pretty comfortable doing it. And it just basically is you bring whatever pages you have for the week. Sometimes it's a full story. If it's a shorter story, sometimes it'll just be like 7 pages of a longer short story. You read it in front of everybody. Usually everybody will have a copy and they'll be like marking. You read it out loud, and as you're reading, everyone's like marking and scribbling, and then at the end, you get verbal feedback from everybody, and criticism and good stuff. And then they give you your papers back. So you go home with like 12 copies of the 7 pages that you read in class. And it's awesome because it's really easy to see what's working and what's not on a broad sense. So there's always going to be like 1 or 2 people that really hate something you love or love something you hate. But it's really easy to see what's not working, what is working when like 10 different people starred a paragraph or 10 different people have a question mark next to a sentence.
I have tons of time where I've been writing here, and I'll just write a part on my guitar, and then I record it on my phone on the recorder, and I'll have like 25 recordings of it, just like this verse and then the chorus. Oh wait, no, maybe it should end like this. Oh wait, is this how it's gonna start? And I feel like for me, with my writing process, less is more. So I like all my songs to be about 2 minutes. I like them to have verse, a bridge, a chorus, maybe no bridge, maybe just a verse and chorus, a couple things, and then that's it. The longer it gets, then it kind of starts dragging on, and I don't know, I feel like playing to people, even if the song is really good, I'd like them to want more than to get bored. So I'll look at my timer like, how long is it? Oh, perfect. Okay, 2 minutes. Better wrap it up.
There is some initial inspiration, or at least some intuition that you can work with some particular idea or pattern or figure. And then there's that initial sort of spinning of thread or something where you just are sort of making a lot of the pieces that you're going to end up using. And then after that, like a more arduous work begins to try and organize it and kind of just will your way through a certain passage until you have, a coherent sort of text that you're working with. And then like another kind of arduous process begins, which is editing and revising that until it eventually has some sort of mass.
Sometimes I'm able to just sort of hit the ground running, especially if I only have a limited amount of time. But if I do have the time to ease into it, or if I sort of need to ease into it, sometimes reading another writer's work, often reading poetry before I get going, just to get me in to sort of tune my attention to language or something, is a nice way to find my way in.
I don't know. I mean, for me, I don't know. I've always liked the same sort of subjects. There's certain novels I like to read, and I kind of try to write those kind of novels. I always knew what I wanted to write about. I just wasn't very good at it. But I've always known, I always wanted to write about the same world and the same sort of people that I write about now. Since I was a kid, I've always wanted to write stories where, you know, why can't the janitor be the hero? Why can't my mom be the hero? Why can't the checker at Safeway be a hero? So I've always wanted to write the same sort of stories. You know, there's times you want to write like a espionage story set in Spain, you know, but I'm just not that guy. So I dream about writing stories like that, but I probably never will. In general, I just like I've always loved writing about the West. I love reading novels set in the West, and I love working class kind of literature. So that's kind of what I do.
It'd be interesting to type the whole thing in about a week or two and spend as much time as I could floating in isolation tanks at the same time to see what would happen in terms of processing the whole thing. And I don't know if that was successful, but it was physically very hard to do that much typing. I find I use, as everyone does, computers for so many things that I try to cut it out of my process as much as I can. That is just a huge distraction. And I don't like looking at screens, and I just like staring into space. I like the physical act of writing. I think slowing down is, for me, a big part of the process. So, someone told me, maybe Annie Proulx told me, that when word processing became a thing, all novels became 3 times longer, and that's kind of true. So that's, I guess, another part of process to continue to ramble is just to say that, all of these tricks that we do and all of these things that we do in order to get the material out is, just a small fraction of what the writing is going to become. And I think as I have written many things, I realize that it's pretty rare that something comes out in a halfway decent form. And a lot of times the problem is really tied up with intention, with what I thought I was doing. And so a lot of times revision has to do with taking enough time away from something to come back and see it differently.
With my first novel, getting into the sort of historical mindset of it, it was largely a process of that emerged from my research, sort of the kind of dry, almost journalistic sort of excavation that was required. So I was writing about a tiny coal mining community in 19th century California, which only existed for about 25 years. So at the time I was writing it, it had been vanished from the face of the earth for more than a century. So I was going into old newspaper archives primarily, and finding contemporaneous accounts of the life and just the sort of industry figures of the coal mining villages in their day.
I probably look like a crazy person when I'm writing because I'm here, on my computer, but what I'm really doing is I am typing and I'm probably speaking as well what it is that I'm saying, not audibly, I hope, but just sort of like almost under my breath.
I'll listen to the same song just like 300 times. Like it's just until I'm nauseated by the song, I'll just listen to that song.
I moved into a space where social listening was mostly what I was doing. And so I've really just been a fly on the wall of a lot of conversations that are happening. And I'm in some writers groups, but I've also participated in some sort of little art projects where I've gone out and just asked people about whiteness and race. And then now, with the state of the world, there's a lot to listen to. It's actually almost too much, but it's for someone who's developed a practice of social listening and been doing it is so intentionally for about 1.5 years, it's actually a wonderful opportunity for me, I think, to be pretty connected to the activated conversations that are happening.
I majored in philosophy, but I sort of minored in photography, which I'm so grateful now for, because the other place I get stories from is like I don't know how to describe it exactly, but I'll be walking around town or driving around town or whatever, and I'll see two people talking, whatever, under a tree in front of a tennis court. And my brain like takes a picture. And as soon as I don't even know how to explain it. As soon as I take the picture and it's like held in time, then my brain starts making a story about it. And that is really where I have derived a lot of my stories from, is for whatever reason, my brain will just like click the shutter and it's frozen. And once my brain starts going on the story, then I have to stop and write it down somewhere, because I'm not good about remembering what feels like something special. So I always stop to write it down. I used to write it down in like these little tiny notebooks that I would have, and now I just like talk into my phone.
The necessary evil lately is the phone, but it's handy. So if we're like in the car, I'll just pick it up and be like, and the guys are like, what the fuck are you, or what are you doing, you know? And it's like, oh, I'm recording. Like, shut up, don't let me lose it. And sometimes I'll go through my phone and I'll have forgotten that I did that. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, awesome. And it will still be there. Like, as soon as I hear it, I'm like, oh yeah, this was my idea. This is how then it kind of snowballs. But sometimes I'll do that and I won't be able to figure out any music for it, or it's just kind of like, oh, I don't know. I mean, there's been plenty of times where like, oh wait, I think that was another song.
It's funny, like when I was, I think when I was younger, there was a lot of carrying around of notebooks and kind of scrawling notes as they came to me. That has been less of a part of the process in the last few years, but definitely paper is still like an initial part. Like there's sort of scribbling of like really illegible notes and kind of outlines and graphs and things that are surely only like readable to myself. And then eventually that gets kind of translated very notationally into a digital file. And then from there it starts to kind of grow into real paragraphs and chapters and things. But definitely paper is an important part of it. And then there's lots of like bouncing back and forth between the screen and the paper, like lots of printing out and scratching of notes, and then kind of importing those notes back in. And so I feel like that, that relationship or that kind of paper-based process is always ongoing.
Definitely, like working on a long-form work like a novel is really different from writing short stories. And even right now I'm working on a collection of stories, but even in that, I approach each story really differently. Sometimes I'll basically just write the whole thing really messily in one go, and then like the bulk of the work will be revising and tinkering with what I already have. Other things really come out sentence by sentence. And I don't think one necessarily ends up being better than the other, it just sort of depends on the material and how I'm thinking about it.
I never worried about that. I never had time to do that kind of worrying. I wrote, in high school and stuff, you just write whenever you can. In my 20s, when I started taking it seriously, I wrote whenever I could, so I wrote before work. It was before Red Bull, there was these Hanson energy drinks kind of thing, and I'd get up in the morning and choke down a couple of those and try to write from like 5 to 7 or something like that. And once in a while I'd hit stride. I'd write after work, I'd write during work sometimes. I never wrote on the weekends because I was out all night being in a band, and I never realized you could write on Saturday and Sunday because I was always in bed watching TV with a hangover. It took me a long time to realize you had 2 days off. So I never worried about the place, a certain cup of coffee, right lighting, right mood, right music. I just never had the time or luxury, I guess, to worry about that. So I can write anywhere, as long as there's not music playing. Can't write with music because I just daydream with music.
I just gather a whole lot of material together. And that sounds really vague, but I have a sense that it belongs together. And I'm often wrong, but a lot of it is just collecting matter and bringing it together and then eventually starting to organize it. And so I spent a lot of time just sitting around with, a clipboard or a notepad and just writing and writing and writing. And then eventually I'll type it in. So in an ideal day, and this happens sometimes, I'll write in the morning, and then there's a lot of kind of administrative work in the afternoon of me typing in my handwritten stuff and then printing it out. And then I used to do this back in the 80s, I guess. This would be 80s and 90s. I used to work with recipe cards, moving things around. And there were computers then, but you just, cutting and pasting became a thing after that. So for me, it's a lot of, just saying, okay, this novel might be in 3 parts, or there's, 4 locations that I know. So I'm just going to write 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the margin, and I'm going to cut and paste this stuff into different files, and then print it, and then it brings different things together, and that makes me keep thinking. I just keep going, and then eventually it's more of a feeling than anything else, which is not a helpful thing to say to anyone in giving advice, because everyone has to come up with their own way of doing things. But then I feel like, okay, I think I can understand how to begin to break this into small enough increments that I would write them. And so then, print out, if not an outline, like a collection of things. And that might be a chapter, it might be shorter, it might be a story. And then I'll write it by hand again. And then I'll type it again. And then, I guess when I talk about it to students, I say, process-wise, probably 50 or 40% of the time is just gathering material that I think might be interesting together. And then about 10% of the time is writing it. And the rest of the time is revision and figuring out, what that was all about.
If I'm having a slow start, really sinking into the material and getting it flowing, which is that's usually the case, I try to absorb myself in a great work of literature that in some way points me in the right direction. Like the voice of that work is similar to the voice I'm aspiring toward, or the milieu of the whatever it is, the contemporary novel or whatever, is a similar kind of setting and atmosphere to the one I'm striving for.
At times I actually write things as I'm doing them. So, for example, I wrote a piece that was about the gentrification of North Portland and those neighborhoods there, and sort of in part was grounded in about 6 months of living in Northeast and walking through those neighborhoods. And I often wrote what it was that I was seeing on my phone as I was walking.
For me, the music is a way of, it's like you try to distract some part of your brain, and maybe it's the brain that is concerned about what you're doing, that would judge you, or it's the brain that's worried about the logic of stuff, and so I like to kind of wiggle a shiny thing at that part of the brain and kind of cause it to look elsewhere while I'm trying to do work that doesn't rely so much on logic.
It's really focusing in on found conversations when they're happening. So literally in the grocery store, or overheard snippets of somebody having a phone conversation, or being at a party. Some of the work that I've done has been around my peer group of moms who are spending time thinking about how to raise their children, and are often doing that and using terms that are actually really socially privileged, and just sort of listening to that and then thinking about it on the page. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And social media too. The Facebooks are blowing up. The Twitters are on fire, and people are actually putting prompts out there now in a way that wasn't even happening 6 months ago. And those prompts are creating dialogues that are very divisive and rough and loose, and people are putting themselves into those spaces a lot more than they used to.
That's the thing I get the most excited about, is those weird times when I just like, when the picture goes off and my brain just like creates a story.
There's just a lot of, it's like choose your own adventure kind of things, you know? And so I feel like writing for me is the choose your own adventure without having to, you know, risk it all.
I mean, I've been lucky in that I've had like enough that I haven't had like, that I've been able to like have a pretty daily kind of writing practice for a long time. And, you know, through having kids and through different moves and stuff, like I've been able to like generally protect like a handful of hours in the mornings to work. And so, yeah, for me, like morning and sort of the first few hours of life are when the writing is most kind of, most productive.
I type, sometimes if I'm stuck, I go to handwriting just to like give myself something else to look at and free myself up from that like screen relationship. But I find it really difficult to generate writing in longhand now. I just can't, I can't write like anything more than sort of note form. I can't make myself like think through formal sentences when I'm writing longhand anymore.
I just like doing it, you know. I always like doing it. I wrote for maybe 15 years before I even showed anybody. So I just like doing it. So I don't ever care about like, you know, I'm smarter in the morning, I think. But I'll take it wherever I can get it. So if my life doesn't get in the way and I had my way of living exactly the way I wanted to, I'd just be sitting here all the time. None of that really matters to me.
I try not to ever go back until I know the ending. I tend to be a little more specific about breaking things up into notes. I'll often say if I have 80 pages of notes for a project, maybe, and let's say it's in 8 sections. The first 2 sections will probably be 20 pages each, and then it'll be less and less and less. And the last section will probably be 4 or 5 pages of guesses. And I'll get there, and I'll look at those notes, and I'll have written up to that point, and I'll think, what is this about? Like, this has nothing to do with where I am, and I'll throw that away. And I'll write the ending. But for me, a lot of what revision is about applying what I've learned by the end of the book to the rest of the book. So I would say the amount of actual revision that happens in the last 20 pages of a book is so much less than in the rest of the book, because I know how the characters talk, I know what's at stake, I know what's going to happen to them. And that's not, you know, there's something great about writing forward in a way where you don't know what's going to happen with these people, and they don't know either. But in revision, you know more than they do. And so you can figure out ways to make it more dramatic. And I think that a lot of that is figuring out what is necessary and what belongs.
Only very late in the process do I generally transfer that to like a Word document on a computer and allow those words to become more virtual and more manipulable.
If what I'm writing is good, there's not a lot of revisions. It tends to come out near whole, especially for shorter pieces.
After I've moved things around enough to think that they're sort of working together, I edit by reading aloud.
Most of the work in the current project that I'm working on has already been through 10, 15 drafts. I have 3 different writing groups that I work with on a regular basis that give me different kinds of feedback.
I love editing. Editing is really fun to me because the creation part sometimes seems like just like walking up a steep hill. But editing is completely fun. Like, it just reminds me of surfing. Not that I've ever surfed, but just like the wave is already there and you just get to like dance on it. So, but then the shitty part of editing is what I have to do with this story, which is I have to go like super high up and ask big philosophical questions because something isn't working.
Like I said, I'm not too much of a perfectionist with that kind of stuff. I don't dwell on it, and I enjoy when I record a song. I'll listen to it. When I record on my phone, I'll listen to it in the car. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is what I want it to be.
I mean, I'm just in awe of people who wrote before word processing existed, and you know, did not have that ability to just constantly be editing, to constantly be cutting and pasting and like saving old drafts and making new ones. I mean, for me, it's hard to distinguish the process of writing from editing at this point. There's just such a constant revision happening. And then, you know, occasionally it will hit a certain point where it has solidified to a degree that someone else should read it and it should enter someone else's mind, and you can start thinking about it in a sort of larger way.
I think all the parts can be, like, both be really rewarding and can be super frustrating. You know, I really believe, and I'm really into talking about the fact that, like, writing is hard and it's work, and this sort of mythic idea that you just sit there and inspiration strikes you and then you like wake up from a dream 12 hours later, like maybe that's someone's experience, but like I don't know if what they end up with is any good, you know. Like I think it's important to like call it work.
But editing's the only gift I have, man. Is the perseverance to edit. I don't know if I have any other gifts besides that.
Revising things and cutting things is so much more of it's more of an intellectual in a way exercise, but the pleasure is just as great, I think. There's nothing like you know, cutting 20 or 30 pages out that you spent a year getting and feeling like, okay, it's better now without that. I'm so glad that I wrote those 20 or 30 pages, but that's not part of this. That's not part of this project.
The editing becomes a musical process.
I trust my own instincts. I think that leads me to the best work.
Even in editing, I'm not really sure that like logic has a place.
I mean, and there are total pleasures in each of these phases, you know? I mean, for me, that revising process and that sort of late phase is like really often some of the most joyful work, where you like you've done so much work that you're moving like much larger weights, and you're kind of in a just a much freer kind of place. And I find even the sentence writing can be much funner towards the end, where you've kind of walked the ground so many times that you're just familiar with the landscape, and some other more decorative part of yourself gets to kind of be freed up, and you're able to kind of do things that are just more fun in a certain way.
I call it cheating, man. I start cheating on a novel with another novel. So it's like if you stop worrying about, you stop worrying about it. You're like, oh, you'll be all right. I always think of it as like you put your book in like a little boat, and then you're just like sending it off into the world, and it's most likely just going to get the shit kicked out of it or sunk. But you feel pretty good that it's going to be as good as you can get it, and then you stop thinking about it. But it is like cheating. Like I'll wake up in the middle of the night, instead of daydreaming and thinking about the novel I'm just finishing up, I'm actually thinking about my new one. And so that's when I know the one I'm just finishing up is okay, you know, because you're not worried about it anymore, and you're falling in love with some other story.
I just love the writing part so much that I'm not going to, you know, that I think it's pretty, if not typical, at least romanticized, that it's a struggle. You know, it's a struggle, but it's great. Like, it's such an opportunity. It's so fortunate to be able to struggle in this way, to ask these questions, to work on something for your whole life. Like, wow, how am I going to put words together in a way that no one has put words together before, that's specific to me and that's entertaining, is really great.
The thing about being a writer, or at least a writer of the kind that I'm striving to be, is it's a constant starting over. You never feel like you've actually mastered the craft or even the process, you know.
I give myself the space to not be writing. I don't force anxiety or pressure onto myself to be producing this day.
I assume that the process will keep evolving as long as I keep paying attention to what it is that I need to keep making things.
When young poets ask me, like, you know, what should I do to become a better poet? I say, well, you should be reading poetry all the time, because then you'll have access to the conversation that's happening in that genre.
This is the book that was just finished, and then this is my journal that's like always with me all the time. And my dictionary. I use a dictionary. I hope this is not embarrassing. I know I can do it online, but it doesn't, I have to, and there's like duct tape. Anyway, this was my mom's dictionary when she was young.
There's certain things, like songs will be like a puzzle piece where it might have like one idea, but then it's like multiple ideas all compiled into one that aren't necessarily related to each other. So it's kind of cool. And I feel like some of my songs, it reoccurs like every time I listen to it. I can still be like, oh, that made me think of this person. And it will make me think of them forever, even if the song's not necessarily about them. It's like one line.
It just sort of occurred to me at a certain point, it's like, oh, in amongst all these different activities that I've been forcing myself to do, the one that actually gives me energy, the one that like makes me feel like, engaged in the world, and even ironically makes me feel closer to my friends and family, even though I'm totally isolated from them while I'm doing it, is the writing. Like I sit there doing the writing and I feel in touch with people, and I feel like I'm grappling with something like imminent and real. And so, even barring all the different like micro humiliations that like are part of the writing life, that sort of experience is still like, it is crucial to my mental health, it turns out. So it's, yeah, I don't know if that's inspiring, but it's a form of survival.
If I'm excited about something I'm working on, just saying, wow, I actually have an hour here before I'm gonna like collapse from exhaustion. I'm gonna use that time to write. Like, whereas in the past I might have been less likely to do that because I would know I would have a regular time the next day.
But the heart of it, the heart of all my novels I love, they're friends of mine, and maybe they're a little rougher around the edges, or maybe they got puke on their shoe now, where before I thought their shoes were nice, but that's just life. You change, my aesthetics change. Maybe I've gotten better, or maybe I've gotten worse, I don't know. But the hearts of them I love, and the characters, they're friends of mine, all my books have been really nice to me, and they've got me through a lot of stuff.
I'm usually called Pete Rock because it's shorter, I think. And I don't really think about myself as a writer, or I try not to.
I'm M. Allen Cunningham, and I'm a novelist and short story writer and small publisher here in Portland.
Hi, my name is Mike. I'm a prose writer.
My name is Lisa Ciccarello, and I am a poet.
I'm Sarah Guest, and I'm a poet, an essayist, sort of former fiction writer.
Hi, I'm Margaret Malone, and I write fiction and memoir.
I'm Jenny Don't, and I play in two bands. I play in a punk rock band called Don't, and then I play in a country western band called Jenny Don't and the Spurs.
Yeah, my name is Jon Raymond. I'm a writer based in Portland. I write novels and short stories and screenplays for film and television. And I've done pretty much every other kind of writing that one does, but lately it's been writing mostly books and movies.
I'm Sarah Jaffe, and I am primarily a fiction writer, although I also do some creative nonfiction and criticism and hybrids of all of them.
My name's Willy Vlautin. We're in my office in St. John's. I'm in a band, we're just wrapping up, called Richmond Fontaine. I'm in another band called The Delines, and I write novels.
So I used to share an office with this hairball. No, I'm kidding. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, I messed that up.
Accept advice. It's good to keep in mind. Faced with a choice, do both.
The writing itself dictates its own ending. You've come to the end. That is what was meant to happen. That's the line that points us outward.